The sound of metal grinding against metal is something a builder never forgets. It is the sound of something broken, something fundamentally wrong, something that tells you your foundation is no longer secure. I stood there on the sweeping cedar porch of the lakeside estate, the late afternoon sun beating down unmercifully on my neck, and tried to force my silver key into the heavy oak front door. The door I had painstakingly sanded by hand, stained with a custom mahogany finish, and hung with my own 2 hands 15 long years ago. But the lock was entirely different. It was a shiny, cheap brass fixture that looked completely out of place on my expensive custom door. It did not belong on my property. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, echoing in my ears like a distressed drum. I had just driven 3 grueling hours from the sprawling city, navigating winding mountain roads to check on my sister and her husband's family. They had been staying here rent-free for 8 months. I knocked. I knocked hard enough to bruise my knuckles, the dull thud vibrating through my forearm. The door swung open, but it was not my sister Sylvia who answered. It was Desmond, her husband's arrogant older brother. He was wearing my custom silk robe, the navy blue one I had bought in Italy during a rare vacation, and he was casually holding a crystal glass filled with my vintage wine. He leaned against the doorframe, looking me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, as if I were a stray, mangy dog that had somehow wandered onto his immaculate, perfectly manicured lawn. "Get off my property, you broke maid," he spat, his voice dripping with such venom and condescension that it actually made me take a physical step back. My breath hitched in my throat. Broke maid? On my own land? The land I had bled for? I looked past his broad shoulder into the grand living room, my architectural masterpiece. There were 6 of them in there. 6 people I barely knew. Sylvia's in-laws, sprawled shamelessly across the custom Italian leather furniture I had saved up for years to buy. Martha, the mother-in-law, had her feet propped up on my reclaimed wood coffee table. George, the father-in-law, was smoking a cigar indoors, the foul smoke drifting toward my vaulted wooden ceilings. They were laughing aggressively, drinking heavily, treating my peaceful sanctuary like a cheap, run-down party house. I tried to step forward, the instinct to protect my home taking over, to demand an immediate explanation, but Desmond aggressively blocked the frame, puffing out his chest. "We do not let trash like you in our home," he sneered, taking a slow, mocking sip of my wine. "Now leave before I call security and have you dragged off the premises." He slammed the door squarely in my face. The heavy sound echoed across the calm lake, ringing in my ears like a deafening gunshot. I stumbled back, the gravel crunching loudly beneath my boots. My mind was spinning violently, my vision blurring at the edges with a mixture of shock and white-hot fury. I could hear their muffled, cruel laughter vibrating through the thick wood of the door. Then, as I turned my head, I saw it. The handcrafted, solid bronze sign that used to hang proudly by the entrance, the one that read Beatrice's Haven in elegant script, was completely gone. In its place was a tacky, mass-produced wooden board painted with the sloppy, glaring words Julian and Sylvia's estate. My own sister had stolen my home. My own flesh and blood had actively allowed her husband's parasitic, lazy family to change the locks and physically bar me from my life's greatest work. A burning rage, hot, blinding, and absolute, ignited deep within my chest. It was a fire that threatened to consume me whole. They actually thought they had won. They truly believed that the quiet, hard-working, ever-accommodating sister would just walk away, get in her truck, and cry in defeat. They thought I would surrender my peace to avoid a confrontation. But they forgot one incredibly crucial detail about who I am. I am a master architect. I design things for a living. I build structures designed to withstand hurricanes. And right then, standing alone on the sun-baked gravel driveway, staring at that stolen house, I began to coldly draft the meticulous blueprint for their total and utter ruin. But how did it get to this disastrous point? To truly understand the depth of this sickening betrayal, you have to know how deeply the twisted roots of family toxicity can grow and strangle you. You have to understand that this was not just a simple misunderstanding over real estate boundaries. This was the explosive culmination of a lifetime of disrespect and marginalization. For 65 years, I had dutifully played the role assigned to me by my mother. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the invisible beast of burden. I was the financial and emotional safety net they only ever remembered when they were free-falling, and the convenient stepping stone they ruthlessly trampled on when they wanted to climb higher in their superficial lives. Standing on that porch, staring intently at that cheap, insulting new lock, the lifelong illusion of family loyalty shattered forever into a million irreparable pieces. Every pathetic excuse I had ever made for them over the decades evaporated instantly in the sweltering heat of that afternoon sun. They did not just want a free place to stay temporarily while they sorted out their messy lives. They wanted to completely erase me. They wanted to take absolutely everything I had built with my own two hands and unapologetically slap their unearned names on it, just like they had done with every minor success I had ever achieved since childhood. My chest heaved as I took a slow, deep, grounding breath. The familiar, comforting scent of pine needles and fresh, cool lake water filled my lungs, anchoring me to reality. This was my air. This was my land. I turned away from the front door, my posture straightening. I did not scream. I did not bang hysterically on the expensive glass windows. I walked back to my dusty truck in absolute, terrifying silence. That is the fundamental thing about people who chronically underestimate you. They never see the catastrophic storm coming until it has already torn the roof off their stolen house. And a storm was exactly what I was going to bring down upon Julian, Sylvia, and every single arrogant parasite sitting comfortably on my leather couch. That locked door was their $1,200,000 mistake. To make any rational sense of the entitled monster my sister Sylvia had become, we have to take a long, painful walk through the museum of my childhood. Growing up, our house was not a home. It was a carefully curated stage, and Sylvia was always, without fail, the lead actress. I was merely the unpaid stagehand, expected to sweep the floors in the shadows and stay entirely out of the spotlight. Our mother, Agnes, made absolutely sure of that dynamic from day one. Sylvia was her undisputed golden child, a fragile creature of supposedly immense, untapped talent, and incredibly delicate sensibilities. If Sylvia sneezed, the entire world had to stop spinning to fetch her a tissue. If I fell out of a tree and broke a bone, I was sternly told to stop crying immediately because my loud sobbing was giving my sister a terrible headache. The glaring disparities between us were not just emotional, they were deeply financial, permanently carved into the very foundation of our young lives. When we were teenagers, Sylvia abruptly decided she wanted to be a world-famous painter. My parents, without a second thought, drained their meager, hard-earned savings to send her to an incredibly prestigious, overpriced private art institute in the heart of the city. They paid for her exorbitant tuition, her luxury downtown apartment rent, her ridiculously expensive imported canvases, and top-tier oil paints. Sylvia lasted exactly 3 short semesters before she dramatically dropped out, claiming the experienced instructors were stifling her unique creative genius and did not understand her vision. She moved back into my parents' house, slept until noon every single day, and literally never picked up a paintbrush again. My parents never asked for a single dime back. They just nodded sympathetically and repeatedly told relatives that her artistic soul was simply too pure and misunderstood for formal, rigid education. When it was my turn to prepare for college, the financial well was completely dry. "Beatrice, you have to understand our situation," my mother had said one evening at the kitchen table, her voice dripping with fake, manufactured sympathy. "We spent everything we had on your sister's education. You are strong. You are practical. You will figure it out on your own." So, I figured it out. I had no other choice. I took out massive, crippling student loans that would haunt me for decades. I worked grueling night shifts as a waitress at a dingy 24-hour highway diner, scrubbing congealed grease off heavy ceramic plates until my hands cracked, bled, and scarred, just to pay for my expensive architectural textbooks and drafting supplies. I studied under the dim light of a desk lamp while the rest of the world slept peacefully. I pushed myself to the absolute brink of exhaustion and graduated at the very top of my class. But my parents did not attend the graduation ceremony. Sylvia had caught a minor head cold that specific morning, and my mother insisted she could not possibly leave her poor, sick sister's bedside for even a few hours. I walked across that grand stage entirely alone, clutching my hard-earned degree, looking out at a sea of proud families and realizing with brutal clarity that if I wanted a good life, I had to build it entirely with my own two hands. No one was ever going to hand me anything. And build it I certainly did. After decades of relentless, back-breaking work, constantly navigating the treacherous waters of a heavily male-dominated architectural industry, and saving every single spare penny I earned, I finally found my own personal piece of heaven. 20 years ago, I bought a wild, heavily overgrown parcel of land right on the rugged edge of a pristine mountain lake. It cost me exactly $125,000. It was just raw, muddy dirt and wild, untamed pine trees. Everyone in my family called me crazy. They said I was throwing my money into a muddy pit. But I saw the immense potential. Over the next 15 years, I poured my entire soul, my sweat, and my savings into that unforgiving land. I designed every square inch of the estate myself. I acted as my own general contractor to save money. I was physically out there pouring the heavy concrete foundation in the freezing, biting autumn rain. I was there painstakingly laying the hardwood floors plank by plank, staining the heavy oak trim, and setting every single heavy river stone in the massive, towering fireplace that anchored the great room. The total construction costs over those long years came out to $450,000. But its true value was so much more than mere numbers on a bank statement. Today, after the market boom, that property was officially appraised at $1,200,000. It was my undisputed masterpiece. It was the physical, undeniable manifestation of my financial independence and personal strength. Every summer, out of a lingering, foolish sense of familial duty, I would invite my family up to the lake. I thought, perhaps naively, that seeing what I had accomplished through sheer willpower might finally earn me a tiny sliver of their genuine respect. Instead, they consistently treated the estate like an all-inclusive luxury hotel where they were the VIP guests and I was the invisible staff. Sylvia would loudly complain that the water pressure in the expensive guest bathroom was not high enough for her liking. My mother would constantly suggest that I should really hire a full-time maid because I looked terribly exhausted and unkempt while hosting them. They never once saw the blood, sweat, and tears soaked into the floorboards or the raw timber. They just saw a shiny luxury they felt entirely entitled to enjoy without lifting a finger. But the truth remained. It was strictly mine. Every single building permit, every hefty property tax bill, every drop of sweat was legally and morally mine. The lakeside estate was the only place in the entire world where I felt I truly belonged. It was my heavily fortified sanctuary from a family that had spent a lifetime systematically making me feel small. So, when Sylvia ended up needing a place to crash, it was only meant to be an act of temporary mercy. I had absolutely no idea I was opening the gates and inviting a devastating plague of locusts into my beautiful garden. The nightmare officially began exactly 8 months ago. My brother-in-law, Julian, ran a boutique consulting firm in the city that supposedly specialized in something incredibly vague and pretentious regarding corporate synergy. Like absolutely everything Julian did in his life, it was all cheap smoke and mirrors designed to project unearned wealth. When the economy took a sudden dip, his fragile business did not just fail, it spectacularly cratered, leaving a trail of angry creditors. They lost their outrageously expensive leased apartment in the downtown district, their matching leased luxury cars were quietly repossessed in the middle of the night, and their carefully curated, fake social status evaporated overnight. I received the frantic phone call on a rainy Tuesday evening. It was my mother, Agnes. Her voice was trembling uncontrollably, thick with a highly manufactured, theatrical panic that I knew all too well. "Beatrice, you have to save her," she wailed dramatically through the receiver, making sure her voice cracked at the right moments. "Sylvia is practically on the freezing streets. Julian lost absolutely everything in the market. You cannot let your own sister become homeless, B. She is so incredibly fragile, she will not survive the stress. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a massive, familiar tension headache forming behind my eyes. Mom, I have a small apartment in the city close to my firm. There is barely enough room for me and my drafting tables. Where exactly are they supposed to go? The Lake Estate, Beatrice. My mother snapped immediately, her tone instantly shifting from a pleading victim to a demanding dictator. You have that massive, luxurious house just sitting completely empty for half the year. It is horribly selfish of you to hoard it all to yourself while your own flesh and blood is suffering so deeply. Let them stay there. Just until Julian gets his brilliant mind back on his feet and launches his next big venture. I hesitated, a deep pit of dread forming in my stomach. I knew their track record intimately. I knew Julian was fundamentally lazy and entitled, and Sylvia was a professional victim. But the relentless guilt trip was already in full motion. My mother brought up family loyalty, moral duty, the sacrifices she supposedly made for me, and every other manipulative psychological tactic in her extensive arsenal. Finally, she handed the phone to Sylvia. Sylvia was sobbing, a pathetic, wet, gasping sound that physically made my stomach churn with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Please, she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. It is just for a few short weeks. I swear on my very life. We just need a quiet place to catch our breath and regroup. We have absolutely nothing left. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Against every single rational instinct screaming desperately in my brain, I caved. I told them they could use the guest wing of the Lake Estate for a strict maximum of 3 months. I explicitly stated the boundaries. I even transferred $2,500 out of my own personal savings account to cover their moving truck rentals and immediate grocery expenses because they tearfully claimed they could not even afford food for the weekend. I handed them the spare keys, a detailed, printed set of instructions on how to maintain the complex well water and heating systems, and offered my best wishes for their recovery. For the first month, they were surprisingly quiet. I thought perhaps the shock of bankruptcy had humbled them. Then, Julian asked if his parents, Martha and George, could come visit for a quick weekend to offer much-needed emotional support during this trying time. I sighed and said fine, as long as they didn't make a mess. A quick weekend quietly turned into a full week. Then, without asking, his loudmouth brother Desmond arrived, loudly claiming he desperately needed a long break from the intense stress of city living. Slowly, methodically, like black toxic mold silently spreading across a damp basement wall, the entire extended family moved in and firmly entrenched themselves. They quickly stopped answering my weekly check-in calls. When I did miraculously manage to reach Sylvia on the phone, she would whisper frantically that things were just so incredibly hard right now, that Julian was deeply depressed, and then she would abruptly hang up before I could ask about their move-out date. 8 months passed. That was 5 full months beyond our strictly agreed-upon deadline. They flat-out ignored my text messages, blatantly avoided my emails, and consistently sent my mother to act as their aggressive human shield whenever I demanded a firm timeline for their departure. I had been entirely consumed with managing a massive, multi-million-dollar commercial landscape project in the city, working grueling 80-hour weeks, which was honestly the only reason I had not driven up there sooner to physically drag them out by their collars. But last Friday, the project finally wrapped up early. So, I packed an overnight bag, bought a nice, expensive bottle of wine as a peace offering, and drove up the mountain to the lake, fully intending to have a serious, final sit-down conversation with my sister about eviction. Instead, I found myself locked out of my own life's work, humiliated and insulted by a deadbeat man wearing my own bathrobe. The front door was securely locked, and Desmond had made his hostile position crystal clear. A weaker, more timid person might have retreated to their car and called the local police right then and there to file a standard trespassing complaint. But I needed to see exactly what they had done. I needed to witness the full, horrific extent of the infection with my own eyes before I planned the precise surgical removal. I quietly walked around the perimeter of the massive wraparound cedar deck, keeping out of sight. The heavy linen curtains were drawn shut in the main living room, but I knew the complex layout of this estate better than the back of my own hand. I headed purposefully towards the rear of the property, where my private greenhouse and architectural art studio were connected to the main house by a glass corridor. This was my ultimate inner sanctum. The heavy steel door here had a specialized biometric lock installed, but as I approached, my heart sank. The expensive metal casing had been brutally smashed to pieces with a heavy hammer. The door was crudely wedged shut with a piece of dirty scrapwood. My blood ran ice cold. I picked up a heavy, decorative garden stone from the pathway, wrapped my thick canvas jacket securely around my right fist, and violently shattered the side pane of the reinforced greenhouse glass. The sound of breaking glass was shocking, but no one inside seemed to hear it over the booming music. I reached my arm carefully in, unlocked the internal latch, and pushed my way inside. The utter devastation hit me like a physical, suffocating blow to the chest. My studio. The sacred place where I drafted my intricate designs, where I proudly kept my framed architectural awards, my vintage, imported drafting tables, and my extremely expensive watercolor sets. It was completely gone. The sturdy load-bearing wall separating the quiet studio from the secondary living space had been literally sledgehammered down. Thick, white plaster dust heavily coated absolutely everything. My original, irreplaceable blueprints, documents that represented thousands of hours of my life's work, were scattered carelessly across the ruined floor, covered in muddy boot footprints, crushed potato chips, and spilled, sticky beer. In the very center of the newly expanded, utterly ruined space sat a cheap, garish, felt-torn pool table. They had unapologetically destroyed my professional sanctuary to build a trashy game room for Julian and his worthless, unemployed brother. I stood there frozen, trembling violently with a rage so profound, so absolute, that it actually felt freezing cold. "What the hell are you doing in here?" A shrill, piercing voice shrieked over the loud music. I slowly turned around. Sylvia was standing in the doorway leading to the main kitchen. She was wearing a stunning, expensive cashmere sweater that I immediately recognized from my own locked master closet. Her hair was perfectly, expensively styled, a stark, jarring contrast to the absolute wreckage she was casually standing in. Behind her, Julian shuffled in, holding a cue stick, looking mildly annoyed rather than even remotely apologetic for the destruction of my property. "What have you done to my house?" I asked. My voice was dangerously low, a mere harsh whisper over the roaring sound of blood rushing in my ears. Sylvia aggressively crossed her arms over her chest, lifting her chin in that familiar, deeply arrogant way she had practiced since early childhood. "This is not your house anymore, Beatrice," she said, her voice dripping with unimaginable entitlement. "We desperately needed more open space for entertaining guests. Julian is trying to rebuild his professional network. We simply could not have your dusty, boring old papers taking up highly valuable real estate in our home." I stared at her, completely unable to comprehend the sheer, staggering audacity of her words. "You destroyed structural walls without a legal permit. You ruined my professional life's work. You changed the locks and locked me out. Pack your bags. All of you. You have exactly 1 hour to get off my property before I have you arrested." Julian scoffed loudly, stepping forward and puffing out his chest. "Now, Beatrice, let us not be overly dramatic and hysterical. We have legally established permanent residency here. You cannot just kick us out into the cold. We know the law. We have rights." "Rights?" I laughed, a harsh, jagged, humorless sound that startled even me. "You are squatters. You are common parasites." Sylvia's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Do not you dare speak to my husband that way in our own home." She aggressively reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone. "I am calling Mom right now." She quickly tapped the screen, and mere seconds later, my mother's face appeared on a FaceTime call. Sylvia immediately started crying, producing those fake, perfectly practiced tears on command. "Mom," Beatrice violently broke in. "She smashed a window. She is screaming at us like a lunatic. She is trying to throw us out into the street to die." Agnes's face twisted in immediate, blind outrage through the small screen. "Beatrice, what on earth is wrong with you? Your poor sister is finally happy and settled, and you are trying to maliciously ruin it? Mom, they completely destroyed my studio, I said, trying desperately to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline shaking my hands. They changed the locks on my house. They stole my clothes. Agnes waved her hand dismissively through the screen, looking annoyed that I even brought it up. Oh, stop being so incredibly greedy and materialistic. You promised that house to her anyway. The ruined room went dead, terrifyingly silent. I stared at the phone screen. Promised? What the hell are you talking about? Sylvia wiped away a fake tear, a cruel, victorious smirk hiding behind her manicured hand. You forgot already, B? You promised to formally gift me this entire estate as a late, generous wedding present. You said it was the absolute least you could do since you have so much wealth and I have suffered so greatly in life. The legal paperwork is just slightly delayed, but everyone in town knows it is mine. Agnes nodded furiously on the video screen. Exactly. You promised her, Beatrice. I heard you. It is Sylvia's house now. Stop being a selfish, bitter monster and let your sister live in peace for once in her life. They were literally rewriting reality. Right in front of my face, they were actively conspiring to steal my million-dollar property using the sheer, brute force of collective, narcissistic delusion. Sylvia looked at me, a victorious, wicked gleam in her eye, surrounded by her smug husband and the muffled sounds of his awful family playing pool in the next room. They genuinely believed that if they repeated the massive lie enough times, with my own mother's enthusiastic blessing, it would magically become legal truth. I looked at my sister. I looked at my mother on the screen. The very last, fraying thread of familial obligation I had desperately held onto for 65 years finally snapped. There was no sadness left in my heart. No grief. Only a cold, calculating, pitch-black void. Okay, I said softly. Sylvia blinked rapidly, clearly caught off guard by my sudden, calm tone. Okay, I repeated, my voice devoid of any emotion. I turned my back on them without another word, walking straight out through the shattered greenhouse door, the broken glass crunching loudly under my heavy boots. I did not look back. I did not stay to argue with crazy. You cannot negotiate with a malignant cancer. You can only ruthlessly cut it out. I drove my heavy truck into the small, rustic town of Pine Ridge, situated a few winding miles down the mountain from my estate. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were bone white. The cool, crisp mountain air rushing violently through the open windows did absolutely nothing to cool the raging fire in my blood. Forced out of my own home to avoid a senseless physical altercation, I needed to know exactly how deep this vile infection went. How many innocent people had Sylvia spun her massive web of lies to? I aggressively parked my truck outside the local hardware and lumber supply store. Old Man Higgins had owned and operated the place for 40 years. I had bought nearly every single piece of timber, every box of galvanized nails, and every gallon of premium paint for my house from him. We had a deep, mutual respect built on 15 years of honest, straightforward business. I pushed forcefully through the heavy glass door, the familiar brass bell ringing sharply above my head. Beatrice. Higgins called out from behind the cluttered wooden counter, looking genuinely surprised to see me. Well, look who it is. I thought you had fully retired to the big city for good. I forced a tight smile, though it felt like my face might literally crack from the effort. Just up for a quick visit, Tom. How have things been around here? He wiped his calloused hands on his faded denim apron, leaning casually against the counter. Oh, busy. But you know that better than anyone, what with the massive, expensive renovations your sister has been doing up at your old place. My stomach dropped into my shoes. My old place. Renovations? I asked carefully, keeping my tone perfectly light and conversational. Higgins chuckled, oblivious to my internal panic. Yeah, she has been in here every other week like clockwork. Said you finally decided to hand the beautiful property over to her as a very generous wedding gift. Awfully kind of you, B. Though, between you and me, that slick husband of hers does not know a hammer from a hacksaw. They ordered a ton of premium drywall, expensive paint, and heavy framing lumber to knock out that gorgeous studio of yours. He was confirming my absolute worst fears. Sylvia had not just lied to my mother, she had confidently broadcasted this insane delusion to the entire town. She was actively establishing a false, public narrative of ownership. I see, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. And how exactly did they pay for all those expensive materials, Tom? Higgins looked highly confused, his bushy gray eyebrows knitting together in concern. Well, they put it directly on your professional commercial account, of course. Sylvia said since the house was a gift, you were graciously covering all the initial renovation costs. She signed all the invoices herself. I figured since she was your own sister, and with your stellar, perfect credit history. He trailed off slowly, finally reading the horrified, furious expression on my face. The healthy color slowly drained from his weathered cheeks, leaving him looking pale and sick. Tom, I said, placing both my hands flat and hard on the counter. Pull up my account balance. Right now. He scrambled frantically to the old desktop computer, his thick fingers flying clumsily across the dusty keyboard. He squinted hard at the bright screen, then swallowed so loudly I could hear it. $18,000, B. They have racked up exactly $18,000 in high-end materials over the last 2 short months. The silence in the small store was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. $18,000. They had stolen my house, physically destroyed my life's work, and committed outright, brazen wire fraud by charging $18,000 to my good name, leaving me holding the massive financial bag. They were attempting to completely bankrupt my credit while stealing my most valuable asset. Tom, I never gifted her that house, I said, every single word crisp, hard, and sharp as a knife. And I never, ever authorized anyone to use my commercial account. They forged my approval. They lied to you. Higgins looked like he was going to vomit right there behind the register. B, my God, I am so incredibly sorry. I should have called you to verify. I should have known better. But she was your sister. She had your mother on speakerphone confirming it one day right here in the store. My mother. Of course. Agnes was actively, cheerfully helping them steal from me. Freeze the account immediately, Tom, I instructed, my voice leaving no room for argument. Print every single invoice she signed. I am going to need them for the police. I walked out of the hardware store 10 minutes later with a thick, heavy manila envelope full of forged receipts. As I sat in the silent cab of my truck, looking closely at Sylvia's messy, arrogant signature on document after document, the true, horrifying scale of their audacity washed over me like a tidal wave. They honestly thought that, because I was family, I would just swallow this massive theft. They thought the threat of ugly family drama and my mother's disapproval would force me to silently pay the bill and surrender the property deed just to keep the peace. Because that is exactly what I had done my whole miserable life. I had always paid the bill. I had always kept the peace. But not this time. They had finally crossed a line that could never, ever be uncrossed. They thought 8 months of squatting would magically give them some sort of adverse possession rights. They thought lying to the town would make it true. But they completely forgot what I do for a living. I am an architect. I deal in hard facts, unyielding structural integrity, and ironclad legal contracts. I design massive things to withstand natural disasters. And I was about to meticulously design their absolute ruin. The very next morning, I was back in the bustling city, sitting comfortably in the sleek, glass-walled corner office of Clementine, arguably the most ruthless, brilliant real estate attorney in the entire state. Sitting right beside me was Wallace, a highly respected retired judge and an old, dear friend who had advised me on several complex commercial property disputes over the years. I had laid absolutely everything out on Clementine's massive mahogany desk. The stack of forged invoices from the hardware store, the heartbreaking photos I had snapped of the destroyed studio before I left, and a highly detailed, chronological timeline of their illegal occupation. So, let me get this straight, Clementine said, peering sharply over her expensive designer glasses, her pen poised. They have been living there for 8 months, absolutely rent-free. They have illegally changed the locks, maliciously destroyed property, committed wire and credit fraud by charging $18,000 to your professional name, and are currently claiming you gifted them a $1.2 million estate via a non-existent verbal promise? That is the exact summary. Yes, I replied, calmly sipping my black coffee. Wallace let out a low, impressed whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. The sheer delusion is staggering. They probably read some absolute nonsense online about squatters' rights and figured they could easily wear you down emotionally. Clementine opened my thick legal file, pulling out several stamped documents. Fortunately for you, B. Squatters' rights in this particular state legally require 15 full years of continuous, visible, and hostile occupation, plus the ongoing payment of all property taxes. They have been there 8 measly months. More importantly, I have your original, notarized property deed right here. I have the county building permits, all solely and exclusively in your name. I have the county property tax records showing you have paid exactly $12,000 every single year, directly from your personal bank account. Legally speaking, they are not tenants. They are not even squatters. They are criminal trespassers committing malicious destruction of private property and fraud. What is the absolute fastest way to remove them? I asked, leaning forward. I do not want a drawn-out, messy legal battle in civil court. I want them out on the street, and I want it to hurt them where they feel it. We serve them a formal notice to quit, Clementine explained, her pen tapping rhythmically on the yellow legal pad. A formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice. Because there is absolutely no lease agreement and they are fraudulently claiming false ownership, we can easily push for an expedited unlawful detainer. Once the 30 days officially expire, the county sheriff goes in and physically, forcefully removes them and all their belongings. 30 days, I mused, tapping my own finger on the desk. That gives them plenty of time to spitefully destroy more of the house. Not if we play this right, Wallace chimed in, a wicked gleam in his wise old eyes. You do not just quietly mail the notice, Beatrice. You have it physically served by a uniformed, armed county sheriff. You make it a massive public spectacle. You shatter their fake narrative of ownership in front of witnesses. It puts them on strict legal notice that any further damage to the property will result in immediate criminal arrest, not just civil liability. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp, terrifying thing. A public spectacle. That gave me a brilliant idea. While sitting alone in the hardware store parking lot yesterday, I had checked Facebook. Sylvia, in her infinite, blinding arrogance, had actually created a public event page. She was proudly hosting what she pretentiously called the Grand Estate Reveal Party this coming Sunday afternoon. She had excitedly invited over 50 people from the surrounding towns. Local wealthy business owners, influential neighbors, even some minor local politicians. She was actively using my hard-earned house to catapult Julian's ruined, bankrupt reputation into local high society, pretending to everyone that they were wealthy, successful landowners. Clementine, I said, pulling up the detailed event page on my phone and sliding it smoothly across the mahogany desk. Can you arrange for the county sheriff to serve these eviction papers this Sunday at exactly 2 p.m? Clementine looked intently at the screen, reading the lavish details of the upcoming party. A slow, incredibly wicked grin spread across her perfectly painted lips. Oh, Beatrice. You are truly a woman after my own heart. I can absolutely arrange for Deputy Orson to be there. He owes me a massive professional favor. Wallace chuckled deeply, a booming sound in the quiet office. A very public execution of their fake social standing. Absolutely brilliant. And the $18,000 in fraud? I asked, pointing firmly to the stack of hardware receipts. We file a separate, formal police report for severe identity theft and financial fraud today, Clementine said smoothly, already typing on her laptop. The civil eviction handles the house. The criminal charges will handle their freedom and their wallets. By the time Sunday rolls around, the steel trap will be fully, inescapably set. I left the luxurious law office feeling a profound sense of clarity and peace I had not felt in 65 years. The heavy, suffocating weight of family expectation, the lifelong, exhausting burden of always being the bigger person, had completely lifted from my shoulders. For my entire life, my mother had aggressively demanded I build a comfortable, easy world for Sylvia to live in. Now, I was going to ruthlessly tear that fake world down to the bare studs. Sunday was only 4 short days away. 4 days for Sylvia to pick out her perfect, stolen dress. 4 days for Julian to practice his fake, wealthy laugh. 4 days until my wrecking ball swung. Cam on ban de zem den day. New ban chua dang ky ken. Hey nan subscribe ba like de kong bo lo koen kok en hung kuen bam nai fi tragia o fan teep theo nay. The days leading up to Sunday were a masterclass in psychological warfare. But this time, I was not the victim shrinking in the corner. I was the general watching the enemy march blindly into a minefield. It started on Thursday morning. The flying monkeys began their coordinated attack. My phone buzzed relentlessly on my drafting table. It was a barrage of text messages and angry voicemails from extended family members I had not spoken to in years. Sylvia had clearly activated the family gossip network, painting herself as the innocent, generous hostess and me as the bitter, jealous spinster sister trying to ruin her big society debut. Aunt Florence, a woman who had never worked a day in her life and survived entirely on her third husband's alimony, left a screeching voicemail. She called me a cold-blooded snake. She said I should be profoundly ashamed of myself for demanding the lake house back after Sylvia had already put so much of her own sweat and tears into renovating it. Sweat and tears. Sylvia had never lifted anything heavier than a crystal wine glass her entire life. Uncle Robert sent a long, rambling text message about Christian forgiveness and how money changes people for the worse. He told me I was dead to the family if I disrupted Sylvia's party. I did not reply to a single one of them. I simply took screenshots, saved the audio files, and filed them away. They were digging their own graves, completely unaware that the ground was about to collapse beneath them. But the crowning jewel of my preparation was my dear mother, Agnes. I knew Sylvia was too fundamentally lazy to come up with the fake wedding gift narrative entirely on her own. She needed a co-conspirator to make the lie sound legitimate to the locals. I needed hard proof of their collusion, something that would absolutely destroy my mother's moral high ground when the dust finally settled. So, on Friday evening, I poured myself a glass of red wine, sat on my living room sofa, pressed the record button on my secondary digital voice recorder, and dialed my mother's number on speakerphone. She answered on the second ring. "Beatrice," she snapped, her voice sharp and immediately defensive. "I hope you are calling to apologize to your sister. She has been crying for 3 days because of your little stunt at the greenhouse. You terrified her husband's family." "Mom," I said, making my voice sound small, defeated, and incredibly tired. I practiced the slight tremble in my breath. "I am just so confused. How did Sylvia convince the hardware store that I gifted her the house? I never signed anything. Tom Higgins said she had proof." Agnes let out a loud, highly condescending sigh, the kind she used when I was a child asking a stupid question. "Oh, Beatrice, please stop playing the victim. It is exhausting. We simply did what had to be done to secure your sister's future. You were never going to actually give it to her voluntarily, were you?" "Give her what?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, letting the silence draw her out. "The house, Beatrice." Agnes snapped impatiently. "Do not play dumb. When you were away on that business trip last month, I went into your old childhood bedroom at my house. I found those old draft letters you wrote to the county clerk years ago, the ones with your signature on them, and the original floor plan copies. I gave them to Sylvia so she could show the contractors and the hardware store that she had your blessing and authority. She just tweaked the wording a little bit to say it was a wedding gift. It is for the greater good of the family. You have plenty of money. Sylvia has nothing." The recording device caught every single crisp syllable. My own mother. She had sneaked into my private boxes, stolen my professional documents, and actively helped my sister forge a transfer of authority to steal a $1.2 million estate. And she felt absolutely zero remorse. In her twisted mind, Stealing from me to provide for Sylvia was an act of maternal justice. So you helped her forge the documents, I stated, ensuring her exact actions were clarified for the recording. Do not use such ugly words, Beatrice. Agnes scolded, her voice rising in righteous indignation. It is not forgery. It is family reallocation. You are being horribly selfish. Now, I expect you to call the hardware store tomorrow and pay that $18,000 bill immediately before they make a fuss and ruin Sylvia's party on Sunday. I smiled. It was a smile that did not reach my eyes. I will take care of the party on Sunday, Mom. I promise you that. I ended the call. I stopped the recording and immediately emailed the audio file to Clementine and to my own secure cloud storage. The trap was not just set for Sylvia anymore. It was set for the entire toxic ecosystem that had fed off my labor for 6 decades. Saturday passed in a blur of cold, calculated preparation. I confirmed the schedule with Clementine. Deputy Orson called me personally to assure me he would be parked exactly 1 block away from the estate at 1:45 on Sunday afternoon, waiting for my signal. I went to the dry cleaners and picked up my favorite Armani suit. A sharp, tailored, charcoal gray masterpiece that screamed authority and unyielding power. I was not going to show up looking like the hysterical, jealous sister they painted me to be. I was going to arrive looking like the undisputed owner of $1 million estate. If you are dealing with a toxic family that constantly gaslights you, let me tell you this right now. Do not argue with them. Do not try to explain your feelings. Gather your evidence in absolute silence. Let them feel comfortable in their lies. The higher they climb on their mountain of deceit, the harder the impact when you finally pull the ground out from under them. Sunday morning dawned bright, crisp, and beautifully clear. The mountain air was going to be perfect for a party. I drank my coffee, reviewed the legal documents one last time, and calmly prepared to execute my sister's fake social empire. The drive up the winding mountain road on Sunday afternoon felt entirely different than my frantic trip a few days prior. Today, my hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. My heart beat at a steady, rhythmic pace. Beside me in the passenger seat sat Clementine, looking like a lethal weapon in a designer trench coat, casually reviewing the thick stack of legal documents and the fresh police report. "Are you ready for this, Beatrice?" Clementine asked, adjusting her sunglasses. Once we walk through those doors, there is absolutely no going back. The family bridge will not just be burned. It will be pulverized. I did not even blink. That bridge has been rotting for 65 years, Clementine. I am just the one finally putting it out of its misery. We pulled into the hidden gravel turnout a quarter-mile down the road from the lakeside estate. Exactly on time, a dark green Mesa County Sheriff's cruiser pulled in right behind us. Deputy Orson stepped out. He was a tall, incredibly broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense demeanor, his uniform impeccably pressed, his heavy-duty belt fully loaded. "Miss Palmer," Deputy Orson said, touching the brim of his hat. "I have the 30-day notice to quit right here. And I have fully reviewed the criminal fraud complaint regarding the hardware store. If anyone gives you even a fraction of an ounce of trouble today, they are leaving in the back of my cruiser." "Thank you, Deputy," I said smoothly. "Let us go crash a party." We drove the remaining distance in a tight convoy. As we rounded the final bend, the sheer scale of Sylvia's delusion came into full, sickening view. The sweeping driveway of my estate was absolutely packed with expensive luxury vehicles. BMWs, Mercedes, and sleek sports cars gleamed in the afternoon sun. Sylvia had actually hired a professional valet service. 2 young men in matching red vests were running around, parking cars on my pristine, carefully manicured front lawn. I rolled down my window as we approached the valet stand. One of the young men jogged over, smiling brightly. "Welcome to the Julian and Sylvia estate, ma'am. Shall I park this for you?" I looked at him, feeling a brief flash of pity. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the festive atmosphere like a razor. "You are going to want to move these cars off my grass immediately. The police are about to declare this an active crime scene." The valet's smile vanished. He looked past my truck and saw the flashing red and blue lights of Deputy Orson's cruiser pulling up right behind me. The boy took 3 rapid steps backward, his eyes wide with sudden panic. We parked right in front of the grand entrance, completely blocking the driveway. The heavy oak doors were thrown wide open. The smooth, sultry sounds of a live jazz quartet drifted out from the great room, mingling with the loud, pretentious chatter of 50 wealthy guests. I stepped out of the truck, buttoning the jacket of my charcoal Armani suit. Clementine flanked my left, holding the thick leather briefcase. Deputy Orson flanked my right, his hand resting casually near his radio. We walked up the sweeping cedar steps together. The heavy boots of the deputy thudded loudly against the wood, a stark contrast to the delicate clinking of champagne flutes inside. I stepped into my own foyer. The great room was a sea of designer dresses, tailored suits, and catered hors d'oeuvres. But what made my blood boil instantly was the sight of Sylvia. She was standing near the massive stone fireplace I had built by hand. She was wearing a stunning emerald green evening gown. But it was not the dress that caught my eye. It was the jewelry. She was wearing my antique diamond tennis bracelet and the sapphire pendant my late grandmother had left exclusively to me. She had broken into my hidden floor safe. Next to her stood Julian, laughing loudly, holding a glass of scotch, acting like the lord of the manor. And standing on a small wooden podium near the ruined entrance of my former studio was Desmond. He was holding a small wooden gavel. "All right, everyone, listen up." Desmond boomed over the jazz music, tapping the gavel against the podium. The crowd quieted down, turning their attention to him. As a special treat to celebrate my brother and sister-in-law's incredible generosity in acquiring this magnificent estate, we are going to hold a silent auction for some of the vintage, antique pottery pieces that came with the property. All proceeds will go to Julian's new business venture. He held up a hand-painted, 17th-century ceramic vase. A vase I had purchased at an auction in Florence for $6,000. He was selling my prized possessions to fund Julian's next scam. That was it. The absolute limit. "Turn the music off," I commanded. My voice was not a scream. It was a deep, resonant projection that cut through the room like a physical shockwave. The jazz quartet stopped abruptly, a saxophone letting out a discordant squeak. 50 heads snapped simultaneously toward the foyer. The room went entirely, breathlessly silent. Sylvia looked up, her fake, practiced smile completely freezing on her face. The color rapidly drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Julian dropped his glass of scotch. It shattered loudly on the hardwood floor, the expensive amber liquid seeping into the oak. "Beatrice," Sylvia gasped, her voice barely a high-pitched squeak. What are you doing here?" I walked slowly down the 3 steps into the sunken great room. The crowd of wealthy neighbors and local politicians parted for me like the Red Sea, their eyes darting nervously between my tailored suit, Clementine's fierce glare, and the intimidating presence of the uniformed sheriff's deputy. I smiled, looking directly into my sister's terrified eyes. "What am I doing here?" I asked, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. "I live here, Sylvia. Welcome to my house. I hope you and your guests do not mind the presence of law enforcement. We have some serious legal business to attend to." The silence in the great room was so absolute, so suffocating, that you could hear the wind rustling the pine trees outside. The wealthy guests, the local politicians, the business owners, they all stood frozen like statues, their champagne flutes hovering awkwardly in midair. Sylvia's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. She desperately looked at Julian for support, but her husband was staring at Deputy Orson in sheer, unadulterated terror. "What is the meaning of this?" Desmond suddenly shouted, stepping down from his makeshift auction podium, trying to puff out his chest and project authority. "You cannot just barge into a private, exclusive event with the police. We will sue you for harassment." Deputy Orson stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing ominously. He did not yell. He spoke with the flat, unyielding authority of a man who dealt with criminals for a living. "Who is the legal owner of this property?" he asked loudly, ensuring every single guest in the room could hear the question. Sylvia practically vibrated with panic. "I am," she blurted out, her voice shrill and desperately cracking. "It was a wedding gift. My sister gave it to us. Everyone here knows it. Clementine stepped forward, opening her expensive leather briefcase with a sharp, satisfying snap. She pulled out a thick stack of documents stamped with heavy red county seals. She walked over to the grand marble kitchen island and slapped the papers down with a loud, ringing smack. "That is a fascinating fairy tale," Clementine said, her voice dripping with lethal professional sarcasm. "Because according to the Mesa County Clerk, the official property deed, the building permits, and 15 years of consecutive, fully paid property tax records, the sole exclusive legal owner of this $1.2 million estate is Beatrice Palmer." A collective, loud gasp rippled through the crowd of guests. Whispers instantly broke out. Sylvia's face turned a horrifying shade of purple. "She is lying. The paperwork is just delayed. My mother can verify it." Clementine did not even flinch. She pulled out the forged invoices from the hardware store and held them up. "Is your mother also going to verify why you committed felony wire fraud, Sylvia? Because Tom Higgins at the hardware store just filed a police report. You fraudulently charged $18,000 of luxury building materials to Beatrice's commercial account without authorization." The whispers in the crowd turned into loud, angry murmurs. I saw the mayor of Pine Ridge quietly set his drink down on a side table and start edging very quickly toward the back door. The illusion of the wealthy, successful Julian and Sylvia was violently shattering into a million pieces in front of their most coveted audience. "They have been living here entirely rent-free for 8 full months," I said, finally addressing the crowd directly. My voice was calm, clear, and projected perfectly. "They claimed they were bankrupt and needed a few weeks to get back on their feet. Instead, they moved their entire extended family in, changed my locks, destroyed my professional architectural studio to build a pool room, and are now actively trying to illegally auction off my antique Italian pottery." I pointed directly at Desmond, who was still holding my $6,000 vase. "Put my vase down, you pathetic thief, before the deputy arrests you for grand larceny right here on my carpet." Desmond swallowed hard, his arrogant bravado instantly vanishing. He practically dropped the vase onto the nearest table and backed away, his hands raised defensively. "This is a complete misunderstanding," Julian stammered, sweating profusely, finally finding his voice. Please, we are family. Let us just go into the kitchen and talk about this privately. Do not do this in front of our friends." "They are not your friends, Julian," I said, looking around the room. "And we are no longer family." Deputy Orson pulled a folded legal document from his heavy-duty belt. He walked directly up to Sylvia and pressed the paper firmly against her chest. Sylvia instinctively grabbed it, her hands shaking violently. "Sylvia and Julian, you are hereby served with a formal, court-ordered 30-day notice to quit," Deputy Orson announced loudly. "You have exactly 30 days to vacate this premises entirely. If you or your extended family remain on this property past that deadline, or if you cause even one single scratch of further damage to this house, you will be immediately arrested for criminal trespassing and malicious destruction of property. Do you understand?" Sylvia looked down at the eviction notice, her eyes welling with real tears this time. Tears of absolute, crushing humiliation. She looked out at the crowd. The guests were no longer looking at her with admiration or envy. They were looking at her with utter disgust. "I think we should leave," a wealthy local real estate developer muttered loudly to his wife. "I am not associating with fraudulent squatters." Within exactly 3 minutes, it was a mass exodus. The jazz quartet quietly packed up their expensive instruments and fled out the back door. The guests practically sprinted for the valet stand, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive embarrassment of Julian and Sylvia. The grand, expensive party they had used my money and my house to throw was dead. I slowly walked up to Sylvia. She was trembling, clutching the eviction notice like a shield. I reached out and gently, but firmly, unclasped my grandmother's sapphire pendant from her neck. She did not even try to stop me. I slipped it into my pocket, then did the same with the diamond tennis bracelet. "You ruined my life," Sylvia whispered, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "You embarrass me in front of everyone." "I have nothing." "You had everything, Sylvia," I replied quietly, leaning in close so only she could hear. You had a sister who gave you a free place to live. You had a family. But your greed was bigger than your gratitude. I turned my attention to Desmond, who was cowering near the fireplace. I looked him slowly up and down, taking in the cheap suit he had bought to try and look wealthy. Now tell me, Desmond, I said, my voice echoing in the rapidly emptying room. Who exactly is the pathetic, broke beggar here? He looked away, staring firmly at his shoes, completely unable to meet my eyes. The power shift was absolute. I turned around, signaling to Clementine and the deputy. We walked out of the front door, leaving the entire parasitic family standing in the absolute wreckage of their shattered, fraudulent empire. The 30 days following the ruined party were an absolute masterclass in watching a toxic family implode. Once the heavy rock of my financial support and silent endurance was lifted, the disgusting bugs underneath immediately started turning on each other to survive. My cell phone became a constant, buzzing source of pure desperation. I did not answer a single call. I simply let them all go to voicemail, pouring myself a cup of tea every evening in my quiet city apartment and listening to the spectacular collapse of their lives. The tone of the messages shifted drastically as the days ticked by. At first, it was pure, unadulterated anger. Sylvia left a screaming, hysterical voicemail, accusing me of being a sociopath who enjoyed destroying marriages. Julian called to aggressively threaten me with a massive defamation lawsuit for ruining his business reputation in front of the town's elite. I merely forwarded that specific voicemail directly to Clementine, who laughed so hard she practically choked on her coffee. But by day 15, the anger completely dissolved into sheer, pathetic panic. The reality of their situation had finally set in. They had zero money. They had zero prospects. And they had exactly 2 weeks before the county sheriff arrived to physically throw them and their garbage onto the street. The most satisfying twist of the knife came on day 20. Julian left a voicemail, and for the first time in his life, he sounded genuinely broken. "Beatrice, please pick up," Julian's recorded voice begged, sounding hollow and exhausted. "It is my parents, Martha and George. They packed their bags and left the estate this morning. They are absolutely furious. They found out about the $18,000 hardware store debt and the pending criminal fraud charges. They completely turned on Sylvia. They called her a manipulative con artist who brought shame to our family name. They told me that if I do not divorce your sister immediately, they will completely cut me out of their own will and refuse to help me find a new apartment. My own family is abandoning me. Sylvia is having a nervous breakdown in the master bedroom. Please, we will do anything. We will sign a payment plan. Just cancel the eviction. We have nowhere to go." I deleted the voicemail. Julian was finally experiencing what it felt like to be discarded by family when you were no longer useful or convenient. He was learning that parasites have absolutely no loyalty to anything other than the host they are feeding on. But the climax of the 30-day meltdown occurred on day 28, just 48 hours before the scheduled eviction. I was sitting at my drafting table in my city apartment when a frantic, heavy pounding rattled my front door. I checked the security camera feed on my tablet. It was my mother, Agnes. She looked terrible. Her usually immaculate hair was a mess and her clothes looked slept in. I opened the door, leaving the heavy chain engaged. "Yes, Mom?" "Beatrice, please, you have to stop this madness," Agnes cried, gripping the door frame with white knuckles. Sylvia called me screaming. Julian actually served her with divorce papers this morning. He is leaving her, Beatrice. He is abandoning her to face the hardware store fraud charges completely alone. Your sister is going to be a homeless, divorced felon. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. I looked at the woman who had spent 65 years prioritizing another human being's comfort over my basic existence. She was not crying for me. She was crying because her golden child was finally facing the severe consequences of her own horrific actions, and Agnes could no longer afford to bail her out. I held up my phone and pressed play. The recording I had made weeks ago echoed loudly in the quiet apartment hallway. "I went into your old childhood bedroom. I gave them to Sylvia so she could show the contractors. She just tweaked the wording a little bit to say it was a wedding gift. Agnes froze. The color instantly drained from her face, her jaw dropping in absolute horror as she heard her own voice proudly confessing to theft and conspiracy. "You stole from me, Mom," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a glacier. "You actively helped her try to steal my life's work. You enabled her entitlement until it mutated into a felony." "But I am your mother," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock, finally realizing she had no power left over me. "A mother protects all her children," I replied smoothly. "You only ever protected one. Julian is divorcing her because she is a liability. The hardware store is pressing charges because she is a thief. And I am evicting her because she is a parasite. You created this monster, Mom. Now you get to house her." I firmly shut the door in her face and slid the deadbolt home. I walked back to my drafting table, sat down, and picked up my pencil. I had 24 hours left until the final purge, and I wanted to make sure my schedule was completely clear for the main event. Eviction day arrived with a cold, biting wind sweeping down from the mountain peaks, whipping the surface of the lake into frantic, gray waves. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. I stood at the very edge of my property line, wearing a heavy wool coat, holding a steaming thermos of black coffee. The cavalry had arrived. Parked in a neat, intimidating row along my gravel driveway were 2 Mesa County Sheriff's cruisers with their light bars flashing silently. Behind them idled a massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck. And behind that was a fleet of 3 large moving vans from a professional eviction clean-out company I had hired at a premium rate. Deputy Orson stepped out of the lead cruiser, accompanied by 2 other heavily armed deputies. "Are we ready to proceed, Miss Palmer?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. The air tasted like absolute victory. "Proceed, Deputy." The 3 officers marched up the cedar steps and pounded on the heavy oak door. "Open up. Sheriff's Department. We are executing a court-ordered eviction." There was a frantic scrambling sound from inside. The door was yanked open by Desmond. He was in his pajamas, his hair sticking up wildly. "What the hell is going on?" he yelled, clearly having believed right up until the very last second that I would miraculously back down. "You can't just storm in here." "Sir, your 30 days expired at midnight," Deputy Orson stated coldly, putting a heavy hand on his utility belt. "Step aside immediately, or you will be arrested for obstruction of justice." Desmond puffed out his chest, his arrogant ego overriding his common sense. "Make me, you glorified mall cop." It happened so fast I almost missed it. In one fluid, practiced motion, the 2 assisting deputies grabbed Desmond's arms, spun him around roughly, and slammed him face-first against the heavy wooden door frame. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the porch. "Hey, get off me!" Desmond screamed, thrashing wildly as they dragged him down the stairs. "I know my rights." "You have the right to remain silent," one of the deputies grunted, shoving Desmond firmly into the back of the cruiser. "I highly suggest you use it." I watched the man who had called me a broke maid get stuffed into a police car in his pajamas, completely stripped of his fake dignity. The irony was absolutely delicious. The commotion brought Sylvia and Julian rushing into the foyer. Sylvia looked like a literal nightmare. Her eyes were swollen and red from days of crying, her expensive clothes wrinkled and stained. Julian looked completely defeated, holding a small cardboard box of his personal belongings. "Get out," Deputy Orson commanded, pointing a stern finger toward the driveway. "Now. This is my house." Sylvia suddenly shrieked, a primal, hysterical sound that grated on the eardrums. "You can't do this to me. Please. Stop them." I walked slowly up the stairs, stepping past the deputies, and stood face to face with my sister. I did not yell. I did not gloat. I simply handed her a thick legal folder Clementine had prepared the day before. "What is this?" Sylvia sobbed, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the folder. The papers scattered across the porch. "That," I said, looking down at the documents, "is a civil judgment from the county court. I hired an independent contractor to assess the structural damage you caused by destroying my studio, the cost of the stolen items, and the unauthorized hardware account. The judge ruled in my favor yesterday afternoon. You and Julian jointly owe me $42,500 in immediate restitution. Julian let out a pathetic, strangled whimper. 42,000? We have absolutely nothing. My accounts are empty. I know, I smiled, my voice icy. That is why Clementine already filed the paperwork to permanently freeze what little remaining assets you have and to garnish any future wages you might accidentally earn for the next 10 years. You tried to bankrupt me, Julian. I just returned the favor. Julian turned slowly to look at Sylvia, his eyes filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. This is all your fault, he hissed at his wife. You said she was weak. You said she would just roll over and give it to us. You ruined my life. Julian walked past her, got into his beat-up sedan, the only car they hadn't lost to repossession, and drove away, leaving his wife crying on the porch, completely abandoning her. The clean-out crew moved in like a swarm of highly efficient, ruthless locusts. They did not pack things gently into neat little boxes. They took Sylvia's designer clothes, Julian's cheap pool table, the trashy decor they had brought in, and literally tossed it all into heavy black garbage bags. They hauled the bags out and threw them unceremoniously onto the muddy curb by the main road. Sylvia sat in the dirt at the end of the driveway, surrounded by the pathetic, bagged remains of her fake wealthy life, watching in hysterical silence as the tow truck hooked up Desmond's illegally parked sports car and hauled it away. By noon, the lakeside estate was completely empty of parasites. The toxic infection had been surgically, permanently removed. I walked through the quiet, echoing rooms. The house was wounded. The studio was a disaster zone, and the walls were scuffed. But the foundation was solid. The air was clean. It was finally, truly mine again. Several months have passed since eviction day, and the crisp, harsh winter has finally melted into a beautiful, vibrant spring. I am sitting on the sweeping cedar deck of the lakeside estate right now, a warm mug of chamomile tea in my hands, listening to the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the lake water against the distant shoreline. The deep wounds of the house have been completely healed. I hired a specialized crew to rebuild the structural wall of my studio, stronger and more beautifully designed than ever before. The cheap brass lock on the front door was promptly thrown into the deepest part of the lake, replaced by a top-tier biometric security system that only recognizes my fingerprint. The silence here is no longer heavy or oppressive. It is profound, peaceful, and entirely mine. As for the parasites, reality hit them with the crushing force of a freight train. Without my financial safety net and my estate to use as a prop, their fake world completely collapsed. Julian followed through with the divorce. He desperately tried to pin the entire $42,500 civil judgment and the hardware store fraud solely on Sylvia, claiming she acted alone. But the judge saw right through his cowardly lies and held them both jointly responsible. Julian is currently living in a cramped basement apartment, having a significant chunk of his meager paycheck aggressively garnished every single month to pay me back for the damage he caused. Desmond, after spending a deeply humiliating weekend in the county jail for resisting arrest and trespassing, lost his lucrative city job when the embarrassing mugshot circulated online. And Sylvia? The golden child, the fragile artist who was always deemed too pure and delicate for hard work? She had absolutely nowhere else to go but crawling back to our mother's cramped house. Because of her pending felony fraud charges, no reputable company will even look at her resume. Last I heard through the rapidly dwindling family grapevine, Sylvia is currently working a grueling night shift as a waitress at a greasy 24-hour highway diner, scrubbing dishes to pay off her massive legal fees. It is the exact same brutal, back-breaking job I worked 45 years ago to put myself through architectural school because my parents refused to help me. The universe has a remarkably vicious, poetic sense of irony. My mother, Agnes, is now spending her supposedly peaceful twilight years entirely financially and emotionally drained, forced to endlessly support the entitled, toxic monster she purposefully created. They are completely trapped in a miserable, suffocating prison of their own making, and I have absolutely zero sympathy for either of them. I have officially blocked every single flying monkey in my extended family. My phone is wonderfully quiet. My bank accounts are secure. My life's work is safe. Next month, I am transforming the newly rebuilt guest wing of the estate into a temporary retreat. But it will not be for family. I am partnering with a nonprofit organization to host an annual, fully funded weekend workshop for young, struggling female architects who are facing discrimination and financial hardship in the industry. I am using my sanctuary to lift up women who actually work hard, who build things with their own hands, and who desperately need a safe space to breathe and create. Through this horrific ordeal, I learned a brutal but essential truth about life and bloodlines. Success, wealth, and kindness are not public family assets. Just because someone shares your DNA does not automatically grant them unlimited, unrestricted access to the fruits of your labor. There are people in this world who carry the title of mother, sister, or brother, but who operate exactly like blood-sucking parasites. They view your generosity not as a beautiful gift to be cherished, but as a glaring weakness to be relentlessly exploited. They will happily burn your house down just to keep themselves warm, and then blame you for not providing enough firewood. Do not ever let society or guilt-tripping relatives convince you that you have to endure abuse, theft, or disrespect simply because they are family. A title does not excuse toxicity. If you have built a beautiful life with your own blood, sweat, and tears, protect it with the ferocity of a lion. Never apologize for demanding basic respect in your own home. And never, ever hesitate to show ungrateful, entitled people exactly what their miserable lives look like without your endless generosity. So, I have a final question for all of you watching this. Many of my distant relatives still whisper behind my back, calling me a cold-blooded, ruthless monster for aggressively dragging my own flesh and blood sister to court, slapping her with a massive financial judgment, and leaving her and my elderly mother to suffer in poverty. They say family should always forgive family, no matter what. What do you think? Did I go too far by utterly destroying her life and demanding every single penny back, or did Sylvia get exactly the brutal karma she deserved for trying to steal my life's work? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story. If you found this satisfying, or if you have ever had to cut a toxic parasite out of your own life, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Your support helps this community grow, and it reminds all of us that we never have to set ourselves on fire just to keep toxic family members warm. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.